Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to continue our discussion with the Enneagram by moving through the various types. And today we're talking about type 4, the individualist. These people are called the individualist because they see themselves as fundamentally different from everybody else. They believe that they are inherently different than anyone else, and therefore no one can really understand them, and therefore no one can truly love them as well. And this is like their big purpose in life, is to truly know themselves and to delve deeply into their personal experiences. Unfortunately, a lot of times they see themselves as like fundamentally disadvantaged and flawed. This is classically the type who can point out all their flaws but none of their strengths. They see all the negatives but none of the positives. But one of the things that makes them interesting is that they don't hide from these negative experiences. Because of that, they don't really they don't want to shirk from them. They want to understand them because their whole purpose is to truly understand themselves as best and as deeply as they can. So they very well can embrace negative experiences and really process them and go through all the hurts and losses and that sort of thing. They can endure suffering through a sort of quiet, sort of strength. They don't really feel the need to put on a show. They don't always reach out for help because that's a lot of times they don't believe anyone really can help them, either because no one suffers the way they do, so to speak, or no one can understand them enough to try and help anyway. And so a lot of times type 4s are the types that just kind of quietly go through life and they don't really, share these experiences with anyone else. They usually feel socially awkward because they don't feel like they can relate to anyone, nor do they feel like anyone can relate to them, so they can be kind of the loner types as well. They want to connect with people, but they just don't know how. They don't understand their own feelings. They don't really believe anyone else can understand their own feelings. And again, that always just keeps them kind of separate from other people. They tend to build an identity around how different they are than everybody else. They kind of embrace this uniqueness. There are certain other types, I think we'll talk about type 6, they'd be horrified at the idea that they are not like everybody else. But type 4s love this idea. There was an old song, it's an old song by Nirvana. I can't remember the name of the song, I should look it up. But there's a line in there where he says, "I wish I could be like you, easily amused." And at the time, it seemed like, oh, it's a real burn. Oh, he's just, talking about how lame everybody is. But I kind of wonder if Kurt Cobain was really being honest, that he really was wishing that he could be like everybody else. And he could just be easily amused by watching, sports or hang out or whatever else like that. Type 4s, they have that real emotional depth to them, and so therefore they are not very easily amused. They don't really fit in with others, and they know it. And, they like it and they don't like it. They have this sort of love-hate relationship. And I'd be willing to bet, Kurt Cobain was a type 4, with no problem. They can have trouble letting go of feelings from the past. They hold on to loss and disappointment. These are the ones who will pine for, that broken relationship they had like 5 years ago. They're always looking for the one who got away. They can be very difficult to be in a relationship with, if you're not picking up on that. They have this depth to them. They can have this intensity to them that really draw people in, but at the same time they feel like they can't really relate to anyone, so they feel like they really can't be loved, and therefore they don't really know if they can love anyone either. And so these are, if you're not getting a picture already, these are like the tortured artist types. And when we go through the examples from history, you'll see that most of them are artists of some sort, creatives of some sort, who, were always just, like I said, the tortured artists are alone, lots of addiction, um, and, the emo kids, people like to make fun of them a little bit. The emo kids wear a lot of black and talk about how, nobody understands them and they don't really like life, that sort of thing. Like I said, they focus on a lot of their negatives and ignore a lot of their positives. Their basic fear is that they don't have an identity. Their basic fear is that they really aren't special, that there's really nothing that different about them, and they have no real personal significance in that sense. Their basic desire is to find themselves. They want to understand themselves. They want to know themselves at the deepest levels, and that's why they tend to go really deep with their emotions and that sort of thing. From my experience, I haven't really worked with a lot of fours in my practice, mainly because a lot of my practice is geared more towards the intellectual side of things, more dealing with thoughts and cognitions and behaviors. I'm not big on processing feelings, and so even if a four was to come into my office, they probably wouldn't last the session. They'd probably be very fast. They would realize that I'm not their guy. Hopefully they would pick up on that beforehand, and they would see from like my website and things that I'm not their guy. But for my sort of like theoretical knowledge of fours and just looking through history and people that I know of, they tend to like dissociatives quite a bit. They like alcohol and opiates. That seems to be their big ones. A little bit of probably like marijuana as well, but they basically want to numb out from this pain of knowing that they're not like anyone else and not understanding themselves, and that they can't let go of all these negative thoughts and feelings. They're the classic people who you just want to tell them to get over it, and they'll tell them, I don't know how, that sort of thing. And they literally don't. They're not just being drama queens. They don't really know how to let go of these old feelings and stuff. So from an extreme aspect, again talking about extreme, unhealthy, average, healthy, the extreme aspect is lots of depression and suicide. This is the type that will be trapped in their own thoughts, their own negative thoughts. They will assume no one else can understand them, so they don't necessarily reach out for help. And those are the ones who usually die from suicide. Really, Kurt Cobain just ticks all these boxes. An artist, his creativity had a lot of emotional depth to it. He was depressed all the time. He was addicted to heroin, and they eventually committed suicide. So he's like your, quintessential type 4 at the extreme level. They can also have a lot of extreme emotional volatility because they just want to feel their feelings and they have no filter and they don't want to contain them and they don't usually know what to do with them. And so, yeah, they'll just be all over the place. They can be a little bit on the realm of borderline personality disorder. It's a different kind. Borderline personality disorder is a very broad personality disorder, a very broad topic. And like I said, with type 2s, I still think they're more likely to fall in the borderline personality disorder. But type 4s can as well, because an aspect of borderline is they don't really feel like they have an identity. And so what they'll do is just adopt other people's identity. This is why they'll get sucked into cults quite a bit. And that sort of thing is because they want to belong. They don't have an identity of their own. And so they'll just adopt somebody else's. And I guess in that sense they might even become stalkers, but for a very different kind of reason. But yeah, people who truly feel like they are a nobody, but desperately feel like they need to be a somebody, will lop on to anyone who happens to be a somebody in their eyes. At the unhealthy level, they usually have a lot of self-loathing and a lot of hatred. They realize that they don't live up to their own fantasy. They have this image in their head of how they should be, how life should be, how their art should be. And I keep going back to artists because these are the type 4s are usually the creative types. There are stereotypical creative types at least, and so they tend to be very creative in some area of life, and it almost doesn't really matter what. But they feel like they're not going to live up to that quality. They feel like they don't really have a chance and that they're not that good, and that alone is pretty depressing because again, what they want to do is have an identity, and what they're afraid of is that they don't. If their identity is being an artist and they suck, that's pretty rough, So that's why a lot of them, can go down the deep end. At the average level, what they usually do is use fantasy and style to kind of bolster their identity. They have trouble keep going deeper to truly understand themselves, and so they adopt another identity, whatever that is. They will be the flamboyant hippie girl. They will be the shy, nerdy kid. who really isn't that shy, but they're kind of adopting that sort of style. They'll wear outlandish clothes so people will notice them. This is kind of like what a lot of the emo kids do sometimes. That's why they will complain about people always bugging them, but yet they wear these crazy black clothes and lots of white makeup and brightly colored hair and stuff like that. So they can stand out in that way, and by being the goth kid, the emo kid, the whatever, and that will be their identity because they're having trouble digging down and finding that other one. They usually are very like I said, they live in fantasy worlds, so a lot of times they want to believe in someone will come along and save them, and so that since they're also very romantic types, they want to fall in love, and they want to fall in love with someone who will understand them and take them away from this world to where life is just boring and mundane and all these stupid, boring people and that sort of thing. So in that sense, type 4s tend to bounce a lot from relationship to relationship, especially at the average level, and the unhealthy level. It's because they are always disappointed. So they find someone, they build them up in their head, and then when they don't live out their expectations, they come crashing down and move on to the next person. Again, that's also very like what a lot of borderlines do. So, especially at the extreme level. They also kind of live in desperate fear that they're going to have to give up on their dreams. And this is probably where like maybe some of you are at. Some writers, you want to write, it's not going well. Maybe you're not getting good reviews, or people aren't responding well to your book, or you just kind of don't see its potential. And this fear of like, oh, I just have to give up writing and now. I guess I'll just have to go back to my stupid day job or something else like that. And that's kind of being at that average level. The nice thing is if you keep going, if you keep pushing and you keep practicing and you keep writing and you keep taking classes, you will get better. Writing is a skill. Most things in life are some sort of skill, meaning that if you invest enough time and energy and practice, then you'll get better at it. And that's true with almost everything. I tell my clients, like, happiness is a skill. Some people are just born, with a little more aptitude towards being happy, but you can learn how to be happy. You can learn how to be a good writer. You can learn how to be a good artist. Some people are naturally good. They just sit down at the keyboard and crank out this amazing writing, and they can't even tell you how they did that because they just have the natural talent. That doesn't mean that you can't learn how to do that. And probably most of the professional writers today, I'd be willing to bet, learned along the way. They weren't just naturally good. There's a few, everybody kind of describes Stephen King as like a wonderkind. But most of them, I think, had to work at it because being a professional writer also involves just a lot of work. So if you're used to working at your craft, then just transferring those skills over to your business, it's not so hard. But anyway, I digress a little bit. At the healthy stage, type 4s are amazing. They have a good understanding of their own emotions and their own depth. They also kind of understand that that's a bottomless pit, and they can never truly understand themselves, and that's okay. And they also understand no one can truly understand someone else, and that's okay. They don't see themselves as more flawed than anyone else. They don't see that there's any more problems with them than anyone else. And so they kind of just go through life. When something goes wrong, they're okay with it. These are definitely probably the professional artist types, because at that point they are really good. They put out good work, and they're okay when they kind of screw up. And they're okay that not everybody likes it. They're okay when they get the bad reviews, because they understand that, yeah, it's just kind of part and parcel of how things go. Let's see. They're usually a little less self-absorbed. That's one of the things, that's an aspect of type 4. They are the types that, because they're so focused on their own experience, they kind of tend to ignore everybody else around them, which is again why they can be very difficult to be in a relationship with. As far as examples go, Edgar Allan Poe was one of the first ones that came to mind. Lots of depth, of course, highly creative. He invented so much of the horror genre and the mystery genre and the suspense genre, as well as writing beautiful poetry. Of course, he was a tortured artist, drank a lot. I think he liked using drugs. I didn't die from suicide, but died under mysterious circumstances. But Edgar Allan Poe would be definitely on the list. Like I said, Vincent van Gogh is another good one. Kind of the same sort of thing. Tortured artist. Created a whole, basically branch of art, and or definitely took it in a different direction. Has very unique style. You can pick a Van Gogh even if you don't know anything about art in general. You kind of know, that's definitely a Van Gogh just by how they look. And again, the tortured artist cut off his ear. I think he was an alcoholic. I think he may even committed suicide. But like I said, a lot of the creative types are like that, and Kurt Cobain and that sort of thing. As far as fictional characters go, one that came up that I thought was interesting as I thought about was Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In the beginning, he was just like another bad vampire, but they eventually got into his history that he was a young artist and wrote poetry, wrote bad poetry, desperately wanted people to love his poetry, and he's shy and quiet and didn't really understand others, and basically just lived at home with his very sick mother. And when he became a vampire, he tried to turn her into a vampire so he could save her, but I think she turned like really evil and cruel and stuff. And so he basically lived out the following centuries as just this angry, tortured artist that no one understood, no one cared about, and therefore he didn't care about anybody else. And he became this sort of destructive figure that ran around and killed people and killed the Slayers and that sort of thing. Loki, mainly from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from the movies, not so much from the comics, and certainly not from mythology. But Loki is like that. He feels like he doesn't belong. Turns out he doesn't. He's a frost giant. He's not actually an Asgardian. His parents aren't his parents, and he's an unhealthy force. So he sees that flaw, and that's all he can focus on. The fact that his mother doesn't care and wants to raise him just like her son. The fact that his brother doesn't care. The fact that nobody else cares about this doesn't matter to him. He sees this flaw and he can't let it go, and that just sort of keeps him going throughout at least the first Thor movie, and I guess what was it, the first Avengers movie. He was kind of like that. After that, they just kind of made him a joke, and I didn't really like what they were doing with the Loki character. Another one that someone talked about was Blanche Dubois from A Streetcar Named Desire. I'm only partially familiar with that play. I remember reading it in high school and or college. I don't really remember. But Blanche Dubois was the one who she definitely lived in a sort of delusional fantasy land. She always talked like she was from the deep south, even though I think the whole story takes place in Brooklyn or something like that. And I've always relied on the kindness of strangers. That's her line. And so I think that kind of fits with her as well. But from a writing perspective, Type 4s can be very interesting to write. They have a lot of emotional depth. And so if you like going deep into a character's personal experience, that's the character for you. You definitely need to be writing one of those. They're also the loner characters, and so they tend to go off and do things by themselves. Not a lot of dialogue, except maybe internal monologues. The Type 4s, I'm sure, appear a lot in a lot of romance literature because they're emotionally deep and no one can understand them, and so this becomes the easy, dynamic of the tortured, lonely artist and the young woman who loves him and wants to show him how wonderful he is or something. And the story writes itself. I mean, you don't really have to go very far with this. But Type 4s, they're not going to be your action heroes, these aren't going to be your scientist types exploring the world, and so it kind of depends on what you're writing. Those types we're going to talk about in future weeks. But anyway, I hope you found this to be helpful, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.